On my 18th birthday, I wanted to eat a cream cake, but my mother, frustrated because I didn't rank in the top 10 in the mock exams, wished I was dead, crying secretly on the rooftop. I was coaxed down by firefighters, but my mother slapped me and was belligerently pushing me. "Why don't you jump? Jump!" She pushed too hard and accidentally pushed me off the building. The firefighter broke down in tears. On my 18th birthday, the results of the second mock exam were out. I performed poorly and only got the 18th rank in the grade. The moment I saw my rank, I started trembling, feeling nauseous and spasmodic, almost about to vomit. My mother's voice was like a nightmare rampaging in my mind. "Please, easy. You are my pride. You must study hard and don't disappoint me. Please, easy. Everyone laughs at me for not having a son, but I want to prove to everyone that my daughter is 10,000 times better than their sons. Please, easy. If you dare not to work hard, I will die in front of you with my eyes open." I began to break out in cold sweat, my cheeks unnaturally flushed, breathing rapidly and irregularly. 18th rank, not in the top 10. My mom will freak out. After school, I walked home silently. I saw a girl in front of me throwing herself into her mom's arms, crying that she didn't do well on the exam. Her mom said lovingly, "If you didn't do well, you can try harder next time." I clearly saw her mom wiping the corner of her eye, and she also cried. My heart ached. Why do other mothers easily cry for their daughters? Over the years, I have always been concerned about the tears of other people's mothers. The neighbor's aunt would have red eyes because her daughter hurt herself. My desk mate's mom would shed tears when she found her daughter losing weight at the end of the year. The owner of the convenience store downstairs, a single mother, often touched her daughter's face and cried. Why? Why can they easily cry for their daughters? When I got home, there were hot meals and my favorite cream cake on the table. My mom prepared it for me especially. She came out wearing an apricot, the wrinkles on her weary face revealing a hopeful smile. "Zizi, eat the cake later. How did you do in the exam? Did you make it to the top 10? I hung my head low, my mind a whirlwind of confusion, and surprisingly, I was still thinking about the tears of other mothers. "Speak up, please, Zizi. What is your rank?" Mom wasn't smiling anymore. Her fragile figure seemed to stoop, her face stern. 18th, my throat felt heavy. My fingers were trembling. I hastily added, "Mom, I will certainly make it to the top 10 next time." After saying this, I fantasized that my mom would feel bad for me, would urge me to eat my favorite cream cake, would tell me it's okay if I didn't do well this time, as long as I tried harder next time. However, Mom remained silent. She looked at me, her eyes gradually turning red. She wasn't crying. She was mad with anger. "Please, Zizi, you really did well. The more you study, the worse you get. Did all your efforts go to the dogs?" Mom shouted at me. "Tell me, how did you study? Do you know how hard your mother works for you? I go to work before dawn. Look at my hands." Mom stretched out her hands, on which were ferocious chasms, the traces of time left by repeatedly cracking and healing. "Look carefully. This is all for you, for renting a house for you to live in, for buying food for you to eat, for buying clothes for you to wear." Mom held her palm in front of my face, gasping for breath, pointing to the door again. "Do you know what people say about me? I can't give birth to a son. All the relatives have sons, but I don't. All the hope of Mom is on you. You must get into Tsinghua or Peking University. You must make Mom proud. Do you understand?" This was the craziest time of Mom, because I was about to take the college entrance examination. She was more anxious than anyone else. If I fail in the college entrance examination, her life will be dim, and she will no longer have the pride to stand up. I squatted on the ground and cried, and I thought of the tears of other mothers again. Why do other mothers cry so easily for their daughters? "Mom, if I were a son, would I not have to work so hard?" I finally asked the question that had been hidden in my heart for a long time. I've always been wondering why I always have to compare with other people's sons. I'm clearly a daughter. You have the nerve to ask. If you were a son, would Mom be looked down upon? My mom seemed to be poked in the sore spot. She roared angrily, I am the only one in the village and the whole family who doesn't have a son. Do you know how people point at my spine? They say you are a loss. You are not promising. Who will make Mom proud? Mom spoke her mind. Tears streamed down my face. I'm not a loss. I don't want to compete with other people's sons. I'm so tired. You're tired? What jobs have you done? Do you know your mom is so tired that she vomits blood every day? What right do you have to say you're tired? Mom raised her hand. I looked at her. So tired to the point of wanting to die. Then just go die. Go ahead. Mom's slap didn't fall, but her disappointment was extreme, and she flipped the table all at once. Food was spilled all over the ground. Bowls and chopsticks scattered. Mom went back to her room and closed the door hard. I stood there in confusion for a long time, then headed towards the rooftop. The setting sun was just right. I stood on the rooftop, watching the traffic below, listening to the laughter from somewhere, feeling dazed from time to time, so tired. Even standing up was tiring. So I sat down, sat on the low, old edge of the rooftop, with my legs hanging in the air. Underfoot was the 7-story abyss. On the street below, someone noticed me and exclaimed, Look, someone's jumping off the building. A flurry of gazes looked up. Surprise and turmoil reigned. I then came to my senses. So in others' eyes I was going to jump off the building. Little girl, please don't jump. How old are you? Don't move. Retreat quickly. A lot of people were shouting at me, expressing concern and anxiety. I felt a strange warmth in my heart, and then I felt even sadder. Why do strangers on the street care more about me than my mother does? I wouldn't jump off the building. I just wanted to sit here. I want to wait for my mom's concern. Preferably, I wanted to wait for her tears. I wanted her to cry for me once. The firefighters had arrived. Air cushion was laid out below, and several firefighters were on the roof. The entire building was alarmed. Many stood at the rooftop entrance. Looking on in curiosity, I quietly watched them as the firefighters drew nearer. Little girl, don't rush. Calm down. A firefighter tried to get my attention by waving at me, but I just sat there in silence. He continued to talk to me, tried to soothe my emotions and divert my attention, but I had no emotions left to spare. His words just circled in my ears and faded away. His lips dried up from all the talking. Then, my mom arrived, summoned by the firefighters to make me see reason, taken aback and furious. She pointed at me in disbelief. Please, easy. You want to jump off the building? Are you insane? This lady, please remain calm. We need to appease your daughter's feelings. The firefighter cautioned my mom. She took a deep breath as her eyes turned red again. Her hands were filled with wrinkles from hard labor, an ugly sight to behold. Please, easy. Look at my hands. How could you think I have ever wronged you? Is studying too much of a burden for you? My mom questioned me, both anxious and angry. A tremor passed through my heart. I didn't want to look at my mom's hands. Not at all, because they suffocated me. A constant reminder of her hardships, her sacrifice for me. Looking at her hands filled me with guilt and sorrow. I felt I had let her down. Little girl, your mom loves you so much. She was on verge of crying out of worry when she knew that you wanted to jump off the building. That's why we let her come up. Another firefighter joined in and shot the first firefighter a glance. The former moved cautiously towards me, extending his hand gently. Is the pressure of study too much for you? That's okay. We can educate your mom if she is wrong. She might be sharp-tongued, but she has a tofu heart. Look, how worried she is. He looked back at my mother. Auntie, you must love your daughter very much, right? Mom pursed her lips, took a deep breath. Yes. Zizi, please come down. My mom finally admitted her love for me, and I had been waiting for this care. Tears filled my eyes. The firefighter skillfully grabbed me and slowly led me away from the ledge. He let out a sigh of relief and patted my head. Okay, little girl, don't overthink this. I gave a nod in my heart. tears streaming down as I looked at my mom. I just wanted to embrace her, though she had not shed a single tear for me. Suddenly, she stormed over to me and slapped me across the face in rage. The veins on her face pulsed. Anger radiated from her glinting eyes. "Please, easy. Jump then. Why aren't you jumping? Have you lost your mind wanting to die?" I was caught off guard. Even the firefighters were shocked. Am I such a burden? Is it the shame that I bring you? Is it because I am not as good as our relative's son? I questioned her silently. My suicidal jolt made her lose face again. "Mom, you want me to jump off the building, don't you?" The tears in my eyes mysteriously dried up as I looked at her with emotionless eyes. "Yes, jump. Why the hell not?" she continued to scream, forcefully pushing me. "Jump. I wasted my life raising you. Jump." In a state of frenzy, it seemed like she had forgotten that the parapet of our cheap rental building was low, and that I was standing right by it with that shove. My body toppled over the edge. The next moment, I was falling. The only thing I could see was how my mom's face shifted from extreme anger to extreme horror in that instant. A 7-story building, 21 meters high, free fall probably takes about 2 seconds. It was just about those 2 seconds, with a breath in and out, and then with a smack, I hit the ground. My 18 years of life were smashed right there, smashed with my mother's own hands. My flesh was scattered, my bones broken, blood seeping from my pores. "Ah!" cries erupted, causing chaos on the street as some frightened bystanders retreated. Firefighters with air cushions rushed over, but I didn't fall as hoped into the cushion. Instead, I scraped past it and landed on the ground, painting the right side of the cushion red with blood. I didn't die, because during the fall, I was struck by a pole of some house, which caused my legs and buttocks to hit the ground first. But of course, I had become faint, my body no longer feeling any pain, just a searing exhaustion, followed by an incredible feeling of lightness. Everything, mind and body, felt light as a dandelion, too pliant. "Little girl," the firefighter who had tried to talk me down rushed out of the building. His face was ashen, drenched in a cold sweat, his eyes filled with disbelief and bewilderment. "Don't touch her. Where's the ambulance?" Another firefighter bellowed, maintaining order. The man didn't approach me. Instead, he just stared at me, his body starting to shake, his lips trembling. He seemed to care about me. It brought a hint of happiness to know someone cared. Perhaps he was a rookie, or maybe I was the first person he had tried to save. How unfortunate. I had failed him. "We saved her. We actually saved her," the man murmured shakily, as another firefighter pulled him away, no longer allowing him to look at me. The ambulance arrived, and I was hoisted onto a stretcher in my semi-conscious state. Or perhaps I was gingerly lifted. My lower limbs were in pieces, but that was irrelevant now. My mother was what mattered. "Mother, where are you?" I wanted to see my mother, to see her cry. That was the only desire I had left, for my mother to shed some tears for me. Finally, my mother appeared. She staggered out, leaning against the wall, her face a frozen mask of numb shock. Everyone gave way to her as if she were a plague. She saw me, being hoisted onto the ambulance, and just stood there, as still as a statue. Had she gone mad? "Why did you push your daughter? Are you even human?" The firefighter snapped out of his daze as he saw my mother, and broke down. He was yelling, his eyes bloodshot, his fingers shaking as they pointed accusingly at my mother. Mother flinched, as if her soul had returned to her body, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. Her face turned paler than that of a corpse, before shifting to an unnatural red, her breathing irregular and rapid, as if she were suffocating. "I saved your daughter. Why would you push her? Why would you push her?" The man continued to scream, his voice raspy from the tears that wouldn't stop flowing. My lightened soul filled with a faint sense of happiness. So there were people who could cry for me. But why wasn't it my mother? My mother wasn't crying. She bit her lip till blood came out. Her fists clenched so tightly her veins bulged. She took step after step towards me, like a broken robot, Start the vehicle and take her to the hospital. Let the family member come, a doctor next to me shouted. The ambulance was about to leave. My mother quickened her pace, almost stumbling over herself. Finally getting close to me, she could see my face. I was starting to hallucinate. Was I alive? Were my eyes still open? Was I looking at my mother, or was it my soul staring at her? My mother was pushed onto an ambulance by firefighters. She squatted rigidly beside me, staring at me stiffly. Her lips were tightly bitten. Blood still flowed, and her arms were tightly strung, as if they were about to break. Yet, she didn't cry. Why no tears? Everything became blurry. I let out my last breath in disappointment. It seemed I would never see my mother cry. Please, easy. You know how much I've sacrificed for you. Why did you upset me? My mother's voice suddenly rang out, so weary and raspy. I couldn't see anything now. Death was devouring me. My brain was dying too. But my mother's words stung my heart, followed by endless pain. It hurt so much. The late pain made me scream, followed by uncontrollable shivers. The doctors were all busy, monitoring my vital signs and trying their best to save my life. The ambulance raced along the road. Only my mother was growling. Please, easy, have you been fair to me? Please, easy, why did you go to the rooftop? I was so tired, suffocatingly tired. Why was it so tiring even in death? Mother, please cry for me once. Let me die in peace. Intense pain, fatigue, unconsciousness, deep sleep. I was wandering on the edge of death, curled up in the dark, cold and in pain. After an unknown amount of time, a ray of sunlight shone into the darkness, and I suddenly opened my eyes. No, not opened eyes, but became a ghost drifting in the hospital room. So, I floated, watching myself lying on the bed. The sunlight from the window shone on my face, with my brain connected to some strange machines. And by the window, my mother stood stooped, gazing at the sky like a sculpture. She had opened the curtain, letting the sun in, and I was awakened. The door of the hospital room opened, and a doctor walked in solemnly. My mother turned around, and I was shocked to find that her face was emaciated, her hair white at the temples, as if she had aged 30 years. Miss Zhang, your daughter has been in a coma for 3 months. According to our judgment, your daughter has brain death. I'm afraid she won't wake up again, the doctor sighed. My mother had no reaction. It seemed she had guessed it and nodded woodenly. The doctor looked at her and me, then turned and left. My mother stood for a while longer, then covered her chest, pounded hard, biting her teeth as she pounded as if in extreme pain. After enough pounding, she sat by the bed like a sculpture. Only her eyes, filled with bloodshot eyes, kept staring at me. Zizi, you don't have to be tired. My mother's voice was thin, hoarse, dreamy. Yes, I'm not tired anymore. But my wish wasn't granted. I wanted my mother to cry for me once. I don't know if you can still hear my voice. You've become a vegetable. My hope is gone. I've destroyed my hope with my own hands. My mother covered her face self-mockingly, her arched back almost touching her thighs. I floated in front of her, squatting down to look at her covered face. Mother, did you cry? Mom didn't cry. She sat up straight, took a deep breath, and then made a call. Come over. Your daughter is confirmed to be in a vegetative state. We need to discuss the future expenses. Child support isn't enough. Mom dialed Dad. My dad, who had divorced her 10 years ago. I barely have any memories of Dad, other than he is tall, fierce, and used to argue with Mom a lot. I don't really care about Dad. What I care about is Mom. The mom right now, she's so strong, quickly composed herself and started negotiating money with Dad. Half a day later, Dad came. He was dressed in a suit, carrying a briefcase, with a serious expression and furrowed brows. Zizi can't wake up? Dad glanced at me, his face devoid of any extra emotion. Yes, you need to increase the money. I can't afford to support a vegetative person alone, said Mom. her tone cold and indifferent. Dad stared at her, sarcastically said, "Zhang Li, you're really something. Our daughter is in this state, and the first thing you think about is money. Can't you at least shed a tear? Why aren't you crying?" "Of course you wouldn't. You have your mistresses and illegitimate children. No wonder you can't shed a tear for Li Zizi," Mom retorted. Dad turned pale and cursed. "You're still the same, a crazy woman who doesn't act like a woman at all. Do you know why I needed to find other women? Because you're not at all like a woman. You always want to be strong. I wanted to let you be a stay-at-home wife and you're not happy about it. Do you think you're so great?" Dad seemed to vent all his resentment from many years. Mom sarcastically said, "Continue. I am bored." "Great. I've been wanting to scold you." Dad's face was filled with rage. "Let's talk about Li Zizi. Our biggest conflict is caused by Li Zizi. Let me ask you, she was only 8 years old at that time. Why did you insist that I save $1 million for her? Why did you insist that I transfer a property to her? Are you brain dead? It's simple. You have people outside. You have illegitimate children. So naturally, I need to fight for Zizi's interests in advance. I can't let Zizi end up on the streets." Mom laughed louder. Dad kicked a stool, pointed at me in the hospital bed and shouted, "What benefit does she need? She's a girl. She'll grow up and get married. You were raised in the same way. Did your family give you any money? Why don't you understand?" Dad was getting more and more angry, looking fierce. "You can't give birth to a son, but you insist that I treat Li Zizi as a son. Do you want our Li family to be the end of the line? Did you forget? You got into a fight with someone on the highway which led to an accident, and that's why I can't have children." Mom didn't mock anymore. She just stared at Dad. Dad looked away, sighed and said, "I don't want to argue anymore. Your thinking really is problematic. You became infertile. I didn't abandon you. It's just that our Li family needs a son. It's normal that I have someone else to give birth. I never said that I wanted to divorce you. You were the one who wanted to divorce and take Li Zizi away. I understood now. My parents got divorced because of me, after my mother became infertile. She raised me as her son and tried to gain benefits for me. However, my father never regarded me as his son, so he asked someone else to have a child. My mother divorced him and took me away. I watched my biological parents silently, my lips tightly pressed together. My mother stopped arguing. She asked my father to give an additional 3,000 yuan every month. You're quite greedy. Huh? I have to give you 8,000 yuan every month? My father sneered. During the divorce, you got a house and over 1 million yuan. Where did it all go? My mother remained silent. With a wave of his hand, my father left. I won't give you more money. Don't think I don't know how Li Zizhu fell from the building. You made the news. It's really disgusting. My mother's body shuddered violently, as if she was instantly drained of her energy and became listless. After my father left, my mother trembled as she pulled out her phone. I drifted over and saw her opening a link to a news article. High school girl pushed off building by her own mother. Rescue worker breaks down at the scene. The news article was very detailed. It even had a picture of my mother, even though it was pixelated. Anyone familiar with her would recognize her. My mother closed it after only one glimpse. Maybe she had seen it hundreds of times already. We were in the news. The atmosphere in the ward was gloomy. My mother sat for a long time without moving. Her silhouette looked sad and lonely. It seemed like she had been crying. I floated in front of her and saw she wasn't crying. Her eyes were just unfocused, staring blankly at my body. That comatose body. My mother must be at her wit's end, wondering how she'll take care of a vegetable in the future. She's so poor. She can't afford to take care of me. Then the ward's door opened and 4 people came in. I recognized all of them. They were my mother's family. My grandmother limped with a cane. My grandfather wore a black hat. My eldest uncle was in a suit and my younger uncle was carefree. My mother stood up, a hint of focus returning to her dull eyes. Mom, Dad, you're here? My mother began, but was interrupted. How's Siju? She looks much better now. My grandmother came over to look at me, her face full of kindness. My grandfather also looked at me and shook his head. It doesn't look good. She hasn't woken up for so long. Sigh. My niece is really stubborn. Why was she thinking of suicide? Why did she go to the roof? My eldest uncle sighed. My younger uncle didn't look at me. He spoke to my mother. Can Zizhu be discharged? We can drive her back to your rental apartment. It's too expensive to stay in the hospital. My mother hesitated, weighing her words. She should be able to leave the hospital soon. I'm thinking about taking her back to the apartment in the east of the city. Can you guys help me find a caretaker? I'm really exhausted. When these words left her mouth, the ward became eerily silent. So silent it made me uneasy. My younger uncle made a noise of disapproval and looked out the window with his hands in his pockets. My eldest uncle didn't speak. He pretended to study the medical equipment attached to me. My grandfather answered a call, and my grandmother looked left and right, letting out a long sigh. Li, your younger brother is in his 30s and is finally about to get married. Your apartment in the east of the city can't house a vegetable. It needs to be given to your brother for his marriage. As for the caregiver, they're not cheap nowadays. You should ask your ex-husband for money. It's his obligation. My grandmother had it all figured out. My mother gently sat down, her head lowered silently for a long time. Having finished his call, my grandfather stood up to leave. Let's go. Let's go. Junjun has arrived home from school. Right? I have to go pick up my son. My eldest uncle laughed and got up to leave. All four were about to leave. My mother suddenly raised her head, forced a grim smile, and said, "It seems I should just commit suicide by jumping off a building. But before I die, I will reclaim the house and recall the $1,000,000+ I lent you." The mother's words clearly shocked the four of them. They all stopped in their tracks. The eldest uncle had an angry look on his face. The third uncle rolled up his sleeves. The grandfather looked displeased, and the grandmother returned to question. "Lily, what did you say? What did you hear?" The mother counter-asked. "Are you going to take back the house and over $1 million?" The grandmother's brows were deeply furrowed. "So, you can't hear that I'm going to jump off the building?" The mother began to laugh, her face ghastly pale, and the bloodshot in her eyes terrifying. The four exchanged glances, slightly embarrassed, but more unsatisfied. "Sister, what do you mean? I am about to get married, and you want to take back the house suddenly? Won't my girlfriend run away?" The third uncle pulled out a cigarette with annoyance. "Zizi is sick. You shouldn't smoke." The mother stared at the third uncle. The third uncle was dismissive and still lit it. "What does it matter? I smoked when you were pregnant and there was no impact." "Put it out." The mother inhaled deeply. "Huh? Are you crazy?" The third uncle was extremely unhappy. "Put it out," the mother shouted furiously, and her cracked lips burst open, letting out blood. The third uncle was startled and stepped back. The grandfather and grandmother hurriedly told him to put it out. He finally extinguished the cigarette, then stormed out in anger and embarrassment. "Lily, we understand your mood. After all's easy." The grandmother approached to comfort the mother, her face once again showing kindness. The mother faces all of them without expression, just thinking about the house and money. "You decide now when you will return the house and money. Otherwise I will sue immediately." The mother was cold and ruthless. The grandmother's loving face instantly darkened. She gazed at the mother in disbelief. "Zhang Lily, how could you do this? We are all family. Do you really want to make things so bad? Zhang Lily, you are my daughter. I have to say something. If you are capable of helping your brothers, you should do your best." The grandfather also spoke. The mother began to laugh. She was laughing deeply, like an owl in the forest. "Have I not helped enough? From childhood to adulthood, I did all the hard and tiring chores, and my brothers just enjoyed the benefits. I got into university, but wasn't allowed to study, because the money needed to be saved for my brothers. Every penny I earned from my job was taken away, saying it was for my dowry. But when I got married, you didn't give a single penny." The mother stared at the grandfather and grandmother. "I wanted to get divorced, and you were all angered to death. Because once I divorced, there would be no son-in-law to give you money every year. But you knew that your son-in-law has been supporting several women outside the house I obtained from the divorce. You took away first, claiming it was for your retirement and was supposed to be just a temporary stay. But then you let my brother move in, the over 1 million. You fooled me into investing it, saying that surgery needed a lot of money. And when I was upset and helpless, you deceived me completely." The mother was still laughing. I saw her blood flowing from her lips to her neck, looking just like a flower from the other shore. One by one, as if enumerating an account, my mom recited aloud all the kindness her parents and brothers had shown her over the years. "So, just because I'm a woman, I'm supposed to put up with all of that?" she eventually asked, her voice devoid of any humor. Calm. My grandparents seemed rather disoriented, displayed a mix of embarrassment and anger. My uncle slammed the door and scolded, "Zhang Lily, is this any way to talk to your parents? They didn't have it easy bringing you up. It's only right for them to expect some support when they grow old." Yes, how fitting. All too fitting. My mother stood up, heading towards the window. "Lily, what are you planning?" my grandmother asked. Her wrinkled face tensed, pointing to the window. My mom retorted, "I'm going to jump. 10 years ago I failed. Perhaps after another decade, I'd succeed." 10 years ago, my memory was jolted back to that time. My parents had just divorced, and my mother, with mainly emotional support to rely on, had to move back to her parents' house. It was then that her own home and savings were taken away by her fair-weather relatives. That year, I was 8, an age old enough to retain memories, but I often chose to selectively forget about that year because the experiences were too horrifying and left a lifelong emotional scar. I distinctly remember a dusk when my mother handed over her bank cards and passbooks to my grandmother. My grandmother, over the moon, called for my uncles to discuss something. My mother sat in a corner, holding my hand, occasionally glancing at them. I asked my mother, "What are they saying?" "They said they're going to treat you just like a grandchild, and even share some land with you," she replied with a radiant smile, though we couldn't actually hear what they were discussing. I believed my mom's words. I was excited about the prospect of receiving a piece of land, even though I didn't understand what benefit it would bring. I was happy nonetheless. Finally, their discussion concluded, and they all looked our way, holding my hand. My mom approached them and softly reminded, "Please don't misuse these 1.7 million. I might need it back someday." Her casual reminder elicited a dismissive eye roll from my grandmother, who said blithely, "What kind of talk is that? We're family. The money belongs to all of us." In a step further, she divulged the planned appropriation. "Lily, of these funds, we old folks will save 500,000. Your eldest brother will use another 500,000 to invest in a restaurant. 200,000 will be for your younger brother's wedding, and the last 500,000 will be saved for the grandson's education fund. My son won't have to worry about his college fees anymore." My elder uncle chimed in joyously, while my younger uncle rubbed his hands in anticipation. "I need to find a girlfriend soon. Feel like going crazy from the lack of female company." I could feel my mom's hand trembling and sweating. At that time, I didn't understand why. Now when I think about it, it was the sudden realization that she'd been duped. Her 1.7 million was gone for good. But Mom didn't protest. With a forced smile, she said, "Well, go ahead then, I'll get it back when I need it. We're family." "Lily, there's no need for such comments." My grandmother hastily waved it off. "I'll go cook something for you. It's getting late, and you need to return to the city." My mother was taken aback, as if she didn't believe what she'd just heard. "Go back to the city?" "Yes. You've been here for 6 days already. Villagers are starting to gossip. Besides, this old house is for your brother. Your divorce status could jeopardize his luck if you stay." My grandmother insisted, holding tightly onto my hand to the point of pain. But I didn't utter a sound because even my youthful innocence could feel that something was off. Grandma made dinner for us. There's a plate of leftover chicken from lunch, a stack of stir-fried noodles, and a plate of bok choy. The chicken was mainly bones with a bit of meat. The noodles were dry and a bit salty. Only the bok choy was fresh, just picked from the fields. So my mom just ate the bok choy. Grandpa and the others grouped on the sofa, excitedly discussing 1.7 million, ignoring me and my mom. My mom ate plate after plate of bok choy, but the rice hardly decreased. I noticed my mom's eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She never cries. After finishing the bok choy, my mom picked up the things, ready to go back to the city. Uncle unexpectedly offered to drive us back to the city. Grandpa and Grandma also wanted to go along, even though it was already dark. To my mom's surprise and rare delight, they asked, "You're going to drive us?" "Yeah. It's too late and we were just talking about how we should drive you back to the city's hotel," Grandma kindly explained. My mother shook her head. "I won't go to the hotel. I have a house in the east side of the city." "We know that," Grandma said with keen anticipation. "Didn't we just talk about it the other day? That house is for us to live in our old age. We will go whenever we're free. Why not tonight?" The light in my mom's eyes faded immediately and she was quiet for a long time. Uncle urged, "Sis, get in the car quickly. I also want to see the house in town." My mom sat in the car silently. The car was old, and we were squeezed in. My mom sat me in her lap, quietly suppressing her feelings. Uncle tried to start the car, but had no luck. He started to curse. "Damn it, this crappy car, sis. Just buy me a new car. Once I have a house and a car, I'll get a girlfriend right away." My uncle had let something slip. My mom immediately became alert and asked, "You have a house? Where? It's yours, right? Isn't it for me? You can't have a son anyway. It's just a waste to keep it." Uncle didn't even turn his head back, and Grandpa and Grandma didn't have time to stop him. My mom was so shocked that she was trembling all over. I was scared and asked her what happened. Mother didn't say anything. She just picked me up. "Lily, what's wrong with you? We're going back to the city." Grandma tried to pull my mom, but Mom shook her off. Grandpa got angry and said, "Zhang Lily, you're getting mad? Is your brother wrong? You can't have children anymore and will never have a son. Isn't it reasonable to give your house to your brother?" "My house is for Zizi," Mom shouted angrily. "What does a girl need a house for?" Grandpa's voice was just as stern. "I do. I've suffered too much in my life. I don't want Zizi to suffer as well." Mom sobbed and yelled, tears about to fall. "What are you suffering from? We are the ones suffering. We've been taking care of you so long that we're half dead. Asking for your apartment. You dare to go crazy." Grandma got so mad she picked up a stick from the corner. My eldest uncle ran out of the room, rolled up his sleeves ready to teach my mom a lesson. My third uncle sat in the car enjoying the show, happily lighting a cigarette. My mom was shaking violently, then grabbed me and ran to the rooftop. The rooftop was 3 stories high, almost 10 meters. No stars, no moon. The evening wind was icy. My mother held me and stood on the edge of the rooftop. My grandparents and uncles all followed us up. The village's neighbors came to watch the drama, looking up at us. My grandmother, out of breath and angry, shouted, "Zhang Lily, are you insane? Get down from there. Aren't you embarrassed? Give me back my bank book and credit cards, or else I'm jumping." My mother inhaled deeply. "Zhang Lily, are you threatening us? You ungrateful girl." My grandfather's crumbled face was swollen as if soaked in water, so enraged his eyes were about to pop out. My mother inhaled again, her voice hoarse like the night wind blowing through the mountains. "Do you think I'm unfilial? Do you only consider me obedient when I die?" My mother questioned, her hands trembling as she held me. My grandmother was so angry she started to cough. My elder uncle spoke up. "What's gotten into you? What can we do with your money and house? You can't have a son anymore. You only have Zizi. A daughter, Isn't the inheritance going to end up with our boys anyway? My uncle was frustrated. I really don't understand your thought process. Look at how many times you've caused trouble. Exactly. Always causing chaos. My third uncle accused. When you were working before, I had to nag you every month for living expenses. And you would only give it after much pestering, saying you didn't have money for meals. Wasn't it just you being stingy with your money? When we came back for the Lunar New Year, our parents asked you for 100,000 yuans for renovation, and you refused, created an uproar at home and embarrassed us to death. The more my third uncle spoke, the angrier he got, tossing a cigarette butt on the ground. My mother closed her eyes, clung to me as if I could give her strength. I was terrified, instinctively holding on to my mother. My mother found the strength, crying out, "Enough talking. Give me back my money or I'm jumping." "You dare to jump? You jump," my grandmother threatened as she approached. "How did I end up raising such a damn dog? You might as well be dead." Seeing the situation, my mother backed away a little, but my grandmother didn't flinch. She walked to the side and intentionally yelled at the neighbors downstairs. "Everyone come and see. I don't have face anymore. I don't need face anymore. See how filial my daughter is. Ready to jump off the building." My grandmother was nearing her limit. She didn't care if my mother would jump or not. She shouted at the top of her voice, calling all the villagers to watch my mother. I was so scared that I cried out loud. In that moment, my mother's body, which was gradually moving towards the edge, suddenly stopped. She wanted to jump, but I was crying. Eventually, amidst the neighbors' murmurs and the cold night wind, my mother backed away, held in her arms. I felt like a drifting piece of seaweed. She sat down on the ground, her face buried in my neck, motionless, neither weeping nor making a fuss. That's more like it. Obedient. My grandfather was pleased. My grandmother scoffed and went downstairs to chase away the neighbors. My uncles whispered to each other, talking about the money in the house, their faces filled with excitement. That night we returned to the city, stayed in a cheap motel overnight, and found a cheap rental to reside the next day. Then began my 10 years of a suppressed life. My mother seemed to have changed into a different person. She wouldn't smile or chat, carrying the heavy burdens of life every day, doing all the dirty and tiresome work. As for me, I only needed to study. My mother forced me to study. I had to study. She was concerned about my grades, but also the grades of our relatives' sons. I thought she had gone mad. My thoughts whirl, pulling me back into the hospital room. I was still lying on the bed, but my spirit hovered around my mother. My mother stood by the window, smiling brilliantly. She said, "She didn't fall 10 years ago, but she will eventually fall after 10 years. Yes, 10 years ago she was holding me and didn't jump. 10 years later, I had already jumped first, so she will eventually succeed. Here we go again. Jump then. I dare you to jump." My grandmother cursed in anger. She was already very old and leaned on a crutch, but her vigor in scolding others remained undiminished. My grandfather was also angry. "Zhang Lily, do you still consider us your parents?" "Yes, you are my good parents. So when I die, I will stick to you forever to repay your kindness," my mother said with a smile, a curse-like smile. My grandparents' faces turned pale with anger, disbelief that my mother would say such things. My third uncle charged in from outside and pushed my mother to the ground. "Damn it, you're insane. I'll kill you." My third uncle was always hot-tempered. My elder uncle didn't try to stop him. He just watched coldly. My mother wasn't angry. She leaned against the wall and got up again, then took out her phone, dialed a number, and said a few words. "What are you mumbling about?" My third uncle snorted. My mother combed her dry hair and scanned everyone with dull eyes. "Actually, I sued you last week. Today I just wanted to give you one last chance. But obviously, you don't love me." My mother nonchalantly sniffed. "That house and the 1.7 million, they all belong to my daughter's easy. Not only did I hire a lawyer, But I also made a will. After I die, the lawyer will contact my ex-husband to handle the aftermath. My ex-husband hates you to the bone, and he has the ability to take care of you. Upon mentioning my father, my grandparents' faces noticeably changed, filled with fear and panic. I've heard my mother say that my father loathes her family. They are insatiable, demanding lots of benefits every year. Sometimes when they don't get what they want, they would even make a scene at the company. My third uncle even hit my father. If it wasn't for my mother pleading, my third uncle would have ended up in jail. Now, my grandparents have seized my mother's property and money, which are meant to be left to me. Regardless of whether my father likes me or not, he won't allow my grandparents to have their way. Zhang Lili, your heart is so vicious. Do you still consider us your family? My grandmother raised her crutch to hit my mother. My third uncle also tried to hit my mother again. Fortunately, several doctors rushed over to stop them and asked them to leave. But they refused to leave, kept cursing and urging my mother to jump from the building. Zhang Lili, you're so bold. We don't want your house and money then. Hurry up and die. Hurry up and jump. That's right. With a daughter like this, it's better to be dead. A woman who refuses to contribute even a little bit for her brothers. It's no wonder she can't bear a son. The cruelest words were all aimed at my mother. My mother remained indifferent. She looked out the window, then back at me lying on the bed. Then she went to sit next to my bed. My elder uncles were arguing with the doctors loudly, but they couldn't affect my mother. My mother was staring at me. I was standing by her, staring back. Many things came to mind, from the turbulent childhood to the suppressed studies when I grew up. It seemed that I had never been happy. Even when I was first in the class, I wasn't happy. Although my mother was happy. But my mother was only happy for a short while when I did well in my studies. Then it was endless exhaustion and suffering. In her 10 years of life, she never cried for me, but she never laughed for herself either. Suddenly, I realized that my mother had suffered far more than me. Zizi, get into Tsinghua or Peking University. Let them see who says women are not as good as men. That's great. Mom was also the top of the class, but my family wouldn't let me study. Zizi, don't blame Mom for being strict. All of Mom's hopes are on you. You have to hold on. Many past words suddenly flooded my mind, making my soul heavy. My mother bent down to touch my face on the hospital bed, then gently leaned on my chest. My spirit felt warmth. It was as if 10 years ago on that desolate night. My mother stood on the edge of the building, holding me tightly. I was her hope. I also bent down and hugged my mother with my non-existent hands. I really wanted to hug my mother. Really wanted. But over the years, her strictness suffocated me. I dared not hug her. Now, I'm hugging her. She seemed to notice something. She looked at the air, then leaned on my chest again. I heard her sniffing. Zizi, Mom was wrong. Mom has had a hard life. A very hard life. No one loved me. No one cared about me. Because I am a daughter. I've been tough all my life. I wouldn't admit defeat. I was the best in studies. I was the best in earning money. I was good at everything. But I was just a girl from the village. I wasn't good at anything. My mother's shoulders began to tremble. I heard her whispering, speaking hoarsely. Zizi, Mom was really wrong. I wanted to be more lenient with you. But the hard days pressed on me, making me afraid. I was afraid you wouldn't study well. You can't walk in Mom's old path. You mustn't. My mother's sobbing grew louder. I felt a warm patch on my chest. Even though I was a spirit, looking down, the front of my vegetative body was wet. My mother's tears were flowing, soaking my chest. In that instant, my tears flowed long. My mother cried. She shed tears for me. She was a mother who never cried. She never shed a tear. But now, she was crying bitterly. Her tears were more than the ink I had ever used. At 18, I seemed to understand some truths. Why do other mothers cry so easily for their daughters? Because they're not suffering. Those who are not suffering are always surrounded by love and are always willing to express love. Why won't my mother cry for me? Because she's too bitter. Those who are too bitter have a weather-beaten face, scars on their hands, and a heavy burden on their back. She isn't loved, so she doesn't express love. She just hopes her daughter can have love in the future. Mom, stop crying. I don't want to see you cry. I hugged my mother tight. But I was just a ghost, so I couldn't hold her tight. My elder uncle and others were still making a scene, pushing the doctors around, cursing. Finally, my mother touched my face again, then looked towards the window. My grandmother immediately yelled, "Go jump then. I don't want you as my daughter anymore. You're just an animal. Go die." My mother got up and walked towards the window. My grandmother stopped yelling, just watched coldly. My grandfather, my eldest uncle, my third uncle, all became quiet, watching my mother fiercely. It was as if they were watching my mother jump from the building. I was anxious, hovering behind my mother, trying to pull her. Unfortunately, I couldn't grab anything. My mother walked to the window, stared at the darkness outside. The doctors approached to console her. "Miss Zhang, what's wrong?" "I'm fine. Just need some air." My mother smiled and reassured the doctors. She said she wants to jump. Haha, old trick. She wouldn't dare to jump. My grandmother ridiculed. My mother didn't respond. She took out her phone again. I saw her send a message to my father. "Dear, I was wrong. It's all my fault. I deserve to die for not giving birth to a son. Next life I will definitely give you a son in this life. I hope you can treat Zizi a little better. She's too bitter. Thank you." My mother edited this message several times, her fingers trembling. She would never have said these words, but she edited them out nonetheless. I realized she was showing weakness to my father. As long as she showed weakness, my father would feel better and he would treat me a little better. The moment the message was sent, my mother's spirit seemed to have been drained. Those words had destroyed her pride that she had maintained for a lifetime. Her whole body was weak, leaning on the window, gasping for air, ready to fall at any moment. Both her body and spirit were exhausted to their limits. "Mom," I yelled out. My grandmother scoffed. "Legs soft. Weren't you going to jump? Jump then." My mother didn't respond. She rested, gathering strength. In the eyes of others, she seemed weak and will soon collapse. But I knew, as long as she gathered enough strength, she would jump without hesitation, just like I did. A tremendous panic came over me. My spirit trembled, realizing that I was about to lose my only family member. And this kind of panic, my mother already experienced it once. The moment I was pushed down the building by my mother, her spirit must have also been trembling. "Mother, don't jump," I was screaming, trying to pull my mother with both hands. But to no avail. Mom's breath gradually steadied. She gathered her strength. I watched as she steadied herself and grabbed the window ledge. "Mom," I shouted as my spirit flew about like a headless fly, suddenly glancing at my body lying on the bed. I had a flash of inspiration and rushed forward, like cotton plunged into water. I fused with something momentarily. Then in the next second, I opened my eyes and the electronic instruments in the ward immediately started sounding. As my mother was just climbing the window, she halted and turned her head. Startled doctors looked at me, unexpectedly finding that I had opened my eyes. "My God, she's awake," with the doctors exclaiming. My mother turned back and hurled herself at me. I struggled to move my eyelids. My body felt numb and my throat was dry. I wanted to speak, but my lips wouldn't move. I could only blink slowly. "Zizi, Zizi, my Zizi." My mother sobbed uncontrollably. Tears fell like raindrops on my face. I blinked again, tears streaming out. "Mom, you're crying again, but I don't want to see you cry. Mom, please stop crying." I had created a medical miracle, waking up after brain death. However, I suspect the hospital made a wrong diagnosis. My brain was not dead. I came back to life, of course. My legs were almost destroyed and had to be amputated. From now on, I will only have prosthetic limbs. My grandfather and the rest were surprised and left after a few cold huffs. The night I woke up, my mother refused to sleep. She sat at my bedside and spoke to me quite a lot. Zizi, Mom loves you. Mom loves you to death. Zizi, you're Mom's pride. Mom is happy just looking at you. Oh dear, I'm crying again. Mom's tears have all been cried out for you. Listening to my mom's words, I often shed tears. I wanted to hug her again. 3 days later, I was finally able to speak. At that time, Mom was mixing food for me. She came back from getting the meal. I opened my mouth, using my hoarse throat to speak. Ma, I love you. My mother trembled and turned to look at me. She covered her mouth as tears flowed straight down. You see, my mother is easily moved to tears. A week later, I sat up and could lean against the wall. There was a void below my waist. My legs from my knees down were gone. Mom cried again, turning away to wipe her tears. I took her hand, asking her to hug me. The mother-daughter duo hugged, laughing through tears. When we parted, we noticed my father was already there, standing at the door, watching us for who knows how long, his expression complex and indescribable. Mom lowered her head to wipe her tears, her face set in determination. I averted my gaze, unwilling to see my father. After standing quietly for a while, he managed a smile. It's good that you're awake. Oh right, Lily, I've managed to get back your house. As for the 1.7 million, your family can pay it back in installments. If not paid, it will be enforced. Thank you, my mother said, still keeping her head low. Dad stood there for a while longer, torn between staying and leaving. In the end, he said hesitantly, I received your message. I've made some small fortune over the years. I will give Zizi a one-time payment of 2 million for child support and transfer it to your account this afternoon. After he said this, he left. Mom watched him leave without saying a word. After being discharged, my mother pushed me home in a wheelchair to our new home. Although it's referred to as a new home, it is actually the house that my mother got after a divorce 10 years ago, and it was occupied by my third uncle all this time. Since my third uncle lived here for so many years, neither my mother nor I liked the house anymore. It felt gloomy. Therefore, we fled overnight and stayed in a 5-star hotel, as we were not short of money anymore. My father had indeed given 2 million yuan in alimony. The next day, Mother put the house up for sale and bought a new 80 square meter apartment for over 1.6 million yuans. Mother, you're generous. It hurt me to see such a significant amount of money being spent. This is what your father owes you. It's fine to spend it. Mother laughed and told me to stay at home while she went back to our rental to pack up our things. But I didn't want to stay alone. I wanted to be with my mother. I want to go back to the rental too, I whined, and she patted my head. And off we went. We took a car back to the rental. Upon opening the door, a foul smell greeted us. It was the leftovers from our meals that had been overturned on the floor and never cleaned up. They were now rotten. Mom and I were stunned. She couldn't help crying and turned away to hide her face. I held her hand tighter and ushered her in. Mom did some cleaning up in the house before moving out. We were poor and didn't have valuable items. Perhaps my books were the most valuable possessions, but Mother refused to bring the books, leaving them, along with other school books and workbooks, for the landlord to dispose of. I didn't even take a single pen. Mother, I still want to study. I smiled at her. She shook her head vigorously. No more studying. Just being safe and happy is enough. No, I will retake the year next year. I want to get into Tsinghua University. I clenched my fists tightly. Mother, frozen, stared at me. I knew she wanted to cry again. What a bother. Our new life started by the spring of the following year. My physical condition had almost recovered, and my mother took me to be fitted for prosthetics. I now had 2 prosthetic legs. They were not very easy to use at first, but it was quite satisfactory once I got used to them. Seeing me struggle to walk, my mum would sneakily wipe her tears, then break into a smile. My mum had found a nice job that paid 12,000 yuans a month. She was a vice manager at some company. I suspected my father secretly helped her. By autumn, I started my repeated year. Returning to school after such a long gap felt strange. But luckily, my foundation was strong and I didn't struggle with my studies. In fact, I was always a good learner, ranking first in the grade more often than not. However, as my mother became increasingly strict and anxious, my stress also grew, which led to distractions and more mistakes during exams. That's why I only ranked 18th in that exam. Now, I am confident about making it to the top 5 or even top 3. One day after school, my mother was waiting for me outside the school gate. She was driving a brand new Mercedes, wearing a black suit. She was quite noticeable in the crowd. As I walked over, she hugged me tightly. Afraid I might fall, ZZ. How's it going? Can you keep up? If not, you don't need to go to school. Mom will support you, she said, sounding quite concerned. It's very simple. Watch me get into Tsinghua, I said confidently. Mom glared at me, helped me into the car, and said, this car is bought under the company's name. It cost more than 500,000 yuans. Now that I've been promoted to general manager, I might as well drive it. Mom was in high spirits. I was highly suspicious that Dad had a hand in this, but neither of us mentioned it. Autumn passed and winter came, and a year flew by in a blink of an eye. I became more proficient with my prosthetics. Even small running was no issue. Mom was also thriving in her career. She had always been competitive and competent, but she could never showcase her skills fully before. Now she was like a fish in water. Her whole demeanor had changed. She dyed her forehead's white hair black, took care of her skin, and looked 10 years younger. From a distance, she was a beautiful woman. Am I pretty? Mom would flaunt herself when she went out, wearing a smirk. You're pretty, I gave a thumbs up. Of course, Mom was pretty, or else she wouldn't have been fancied by my dad, a local. When she was young, let's go then. Let's depart. Mom sent me to the examination hall. It was the college entrance examination day, the day I had been waiting for a long time. After finishing all the exams, the entrance examination was over. After the final exam, I met Mom at the door. She didn't ask any questions. She just snapped her fingers. My lady, let's go have steak. I've specifically reserved it for you. Okay. On the day of the results, Mom deliberately avoided me. She bought fish and was cooking in the kitchen, humming a song while bending her neck. I checked the results and immediately jumped over. Mom, 691 points. What? Mom's chopper fell into the sink. Tears welled up in her eyes immediately. I hugged her tightly. Mom, I'm definitely going to Tsinghua. My mom spent 100,000, set up 12 tables in the best hotel in the city, and modestly invited my friends and relatives to my matriculation banquet. This was the first time I realized we had so many relatives and friends. I barely saw 2 of them in a whole year, but now dozens suddenly sprouted. Genius has emerged in Lily's family. That's great. Our village has produced a Tsinghua University student for the first time in 100 years. Very happy. I've been saying that if Lily's so competent, her daughter won't be down. My mom stood quietly, smiling in response to everyone's compliments. I was standing on the side in loose jeans, putting on a fake smile, until my mouth felt sore from smiling. Then I saw some familiar faces. My grandparents, my eldest and third uncle. It's been over a year since we last met, but my grandparents aged as if they'd aged several decades. Their hair is all white, with bent backs and old, broken clothes. You can tell they haven't had a good life. My eldest uncle looked as if he had been covered in dirt, embodying the image of a middle-aged loser. Standing next to him was a young fellow with yellow hair. He had ear, nose, and lip piercings, and even seemed to have a tongue piercing, coupled with a tattoo on his forehead. He was a sight to behold. Even more shocking was that he was wearing skinny jeans and bean shoes, and his ankles were thinner than my arms. I was stupefied. Is this my cousin? He's only a year older than me. Little sister, Long time no see. You're so beautiful now. My eldest uncle came over directly and was the first to shake hands with my mom. Mom nodded lightly. Long time no see. Eldest uncle was embarrassed for a moment, turned around and pointed at the blonde young man. Little sister, this is Junjun. Do you recognize him? Do you know? He should be in college now. Is it so free in college now? My mom was looking at Junjun. My eldest uncle was even more embarrassed, and then scolded Junjun on the spot. He's studying my ass. He cheated the whole village into believing that he got into a second-tier university, but only got into a poor vocational school. And we even held a graduation banquet in the village. This son of a bitch told us he was going to Guangzhou for university but was actually out partying, borrowing hundreds of thousands from loan sharks. Our family is ruined because of him. The eldest uncle got angrier and angrier as he spoke, slapped Junjun's face in the middle of his rant. Look at you. Do you even look like a human? Can't you learn from Zizi? She was admitted to Tsinghua. Junjun was caught off guard by the sudden slap, and in a rage, he punched my eldest uncle in the face. Go to hell. You? The elder uncle fell to the ground with a thud, convulsing and fainting. The crowd was in chaos. My mom frowned, called the security guard, and asked Junjun to take the eldest uncle to the hospital. My grandparents wept uninterruptedly, crying in frustration. A son beating his father. This is unfilial. So unfilial. Our Junjun is a disaster. Sister, you don't know. Wasn't I going to get married before? Guess what happened? Junjun owed money to loan sharks. They came to our house and threw manure. My girlfriend was there. She got it in the face, and she broke up with me on the spot. Yeah. Your younger brother is still unmarried. If you have a suitable match, introduce her quickly. My grandmother said to my mom with a cough. My grandfather added, I heard you're making big money now. If you have spare change, help us. Our family's living is worse than death. Then go die. My mom cut in. My grandfather choked, didn't catch his breath. His Parkinson's got worse. His face turned into the color of pig liver. My grandmother was also blown away, trembling and falling to the ground. The third uncle hurriedly held her and opened his mouth to shout, Help, this unfilial daughter. Before he could finish, he was kicked away, and a group of grandly dressed guests came over, led by my dad. Today is my daughter's matriculation banquet. Who dares to make trouble? My dad walked with an air of dominance. His aura alone was enough to turn the third uncle's face white. He knows my dad. In the end, all he could do was to take my grandparents and leave in disgrace. My mom's face was still calm. My dad looked a bit uneasy, but with a large group of wealthy people behind him, he needed to maintain his image. This is my ex-wife, Zhang Lily, and this is my daughter, Li Zizi. My dad enthusiastically introduced. My daughter's Easy scored 691 points, straight into Tsinghua. Mr. Li has a good way of educating his kids. Congratulations to Mr. Li. A group of people flattered him. My dad was elated, sneaking glances at my mom, probably thinking she looked pretty today. My mom smiled. You can go in, Mr. Li. Okay. Dad was overjoyed and came to hold my hand directly. I instinctively shook him off, but Dad was an expert. He squatted down to hug me. Zizi has grown up. That's great. A high achiever from Tsinghua. This graduation banquet was full of joy. Friends and family didn't want to leave till they were drunk. After the third round of drinks, I found that my mom and dad were gone. I went looking for them and heard noises coming from the restroom. I went over and saw my dad, red-faced and drunk on alcohol, clutching my mom's shoulder, babbling. Lily, I was wrong. Very wrong. You're a strong woman, and it's normal for you to be strong. I shouldn't have confined you at home. Your infertility is also my fault, and I even resented you for it. I should die. My dad spoke with emotion, and then sighed a long sigh. Do you remember the text message you sent me? You apologized to me, saying you will bear me a son in the next life. I know you were saying that for Zizi, But I was very moved. My mistresses all used their illegitimate children to gain benefits. All of that love was corrupted, and I'm tired of it. My dad was about to pass out drunk. You sent me a text message. So I rushed to the hospital, seeing you and Zizi crying. I really felt bad. What does a man lie for? Isn't it the love of his wife and children? Only you two have love. My dad was about to hug my mom as he was talking. My mom directly dodged. My dad hugged nothing and seemed to sober up a bit. He then slapped himself and took out a card out from his pocket. I said those things without any other meaning. I know everything can't be reversed, and I don't have any extravagant hopes, only hope that you will take care of Zizi well. I hope she can be happy in the future. He gave the card to my mom, saying that there were 5 million in it, a reward for me. I leaned against the wall and watched my dad leave. My mom took the card, went to wash her face, and came out calm. I walked over and took her hand. She smiled at me. Eavesdropping on your dad ranting? Not at all. It was just a coincidence. Naughty. After the matriculation banquet, my mom decided to go stay with me in Beijing. I think she wanted to avoid my dad. She did not wish to return to her past. She had saved quite a bit of money, adding the 5 million given by my dad, plus the proceeds from selling the house. It was enough for us to live in Beijing. Of course, we would rent a house first, and then buy a new one once I had established my career and settled in Beijing. When we got to Beijing, we became ordinary citizens again, living in an apartment, relying on the subway to get around, and not spending lavishly on meals. We would save the money. Once my mom found a job, we officially settled down. During this time, she told me something. My eldest uncle had become paraplegic. The punch from Junjin was so powerful that it was comparable to a deadly martial arts hit, which left my eldest uncle incapable of taking care of himself. My eldest uncle's wife ran away overnight, and Junjin became a vagabond in the city. My grandparents could only farm while taking care of my eldest uncle, and life was extremely hard. As for my third uncle, in order to raise money to get married, he listened to an old classmate's advice and ran to northern Myanmar. He risked his life for money. I couldn't help but laugh. More people needed to laugh. So during my time at university, I used my spare time to write a novel named The Mom Who Doesn't Cry. My mom's life was too hard. She didn't receive much love, so she didn't know how to express love. That's why she never cried for me, until I fell from a tall building, became a vegetable, and then miraculously resurrected. My mom finally cried. Many years ago, she wanted to jump off a building, holding me in her arms. She didn't cry then. Many years later, when we were saying goodbye in the hospital, she wanted to jump from a building again. She didn't cry then either. But when I woke up, she would always cry. I would never again envy other people's mothers for easily crying over their daughters. Because to cry is to love, and not to cry is also love. The existence of my mom itself is a form of love.